I used to poop on this tree. Before I had set up the pooping station. This is sometime probably December 7th or something. It's kind of early December, around the 7th. This isn't a pooping video though. This is sighting part 2. Put some gutters on. Temporary downspout. Basically, when it rains, all that water goes, just, you know, falls off. Plus the runoff from the hill, it fills my drain tube past capacity, so I get water buildup. And in like a real heavy rain, it's at risk of filling up and flooding in, you know. So this is just to divert the bulk of the water away from the hole, you know, just getting it out of the way. So put on the gutters. Oh, and did some video of this fascia, putting on this fascia. So fascia gutter, main thing, you know, kind of the namesake, siding. So this half of the siding is done. It's not done. I still need to do these sides pieces, but I'm not gonna do those until I do cinder block. You know, do these cinder block, and most likely do cinder block right here. I'm not too sure just yet what I'll do. You know, but once I get my block done, I'll do the siding and butt the siding to the block. You know, but this is weatherized for now, you know. I might tack something on here just to keep this held down, you know. That is kind of close to the thing. So basic thing is door is looking good. Right hand in swing door. Right. When you're doing right or left, it's kind of always swinging in. And you use your right hand to do it. You know, it's the hinge side. Kind of, if you're to use your left hand to do it, your hand would be in front of you. You know, but when you use your right hand, it's natural. So you just naturally, on a right hand door, you naturally use your right, or you naturally on a left hand door, you naturally use your left. So it's got this kind of like a Vicor tape. Roll-on tape. It's like a self-sealing membrane. It's kind of like a really sticky tar and plastic. It's not as thick as Vicor. You know, Vicor was a nice thick self-sealing membrane. That's pretty thin and flimsy. But you know, they saw that Lowe's, so it's got to be good enough. So tar paper over the plywood, and then Vicor from the plywood, and then set the door. Door set on a bed of silicone up front, and glue kind of all around in the back. I did some shims out of gutter. Shimmed up that side a little shim there, and then the glue just kind of squiggled around in there, and that glue hardened and acted as kind of a shim to fit. So, you know, I got a little shim back there, some shims around here, I use screws. I can just hit this up with a little bit of caulking and paint over it, and you don't notice it. But then if you look really closely, you can find it, because it'll stand out a little bit. So basically, you never see it unless you're looking for it. You know, so if I ever got to take this door out and I'm looking for it, I can look closely and find my screw hole, you know. So that's why I like screws, you know, like everyday use, you just glance right over it. Once it's caulked and painted, you glance right over it, easy peasy. But if you look closely, you can always find them, you know. With one thing of caulking, you know, like maybe two things of caulking, caulking will shrink, you know. Maybe two things of caulking, it won't, you know. But if you putty it, you can't really find it, you know. It's just kind of lost, you know. But anyways, and then some spray foam. This has this kind of thing, you know, and then the spray foam. And this is much to fill in air gaps as to keep out the bugs. Normally you would want your hinge side tight against the wood. I went the other way and had my one thing tight against the wood. So I can get a little extra swing, you know. So the finished wall is going to be right here. And you can take off the brick mold that comes with and scoot it back, but then I would have a seam in there. And this door would be set back 8 inches. I don't want it set back 8 inches, and I don't want a seam right here, so I went ahead and kept it, you know, the brick mold. But it means that this is going to hit the wall, you know, like right about here the wall will be. And that gives me this. But if I had these hinges all the way tight against there, I would only be able to get like 90 degrees, you know. I'd be able to get like that, you know. And like this, the door handles stick out. And I'll snag it. But like this, the door handle won't stick out. You know, I'll be able to move in and out without snagging the door handle. Pop the door. I put the whole thing in here to get an idea of what I needed for shimming, you know, like just tossed it in there, leaving the door in the thing, you know, still hooked up with this little thing. And you could see, all right, need to do this, need to do that, blah, blah, blah. And then I pop the door, you know, pop the hinges to take the door out, because most of the weight of the door is the door itself, not the casing. So then install the casing, you know, once I had that rough idea. And once the casing was roughly installed, put the door back in. And so you can check your gapping, you know. Make sure the gapping is all beautiful. This is the most beautiful gapping I've ever seen. It's just like, how did that happen? You know, sometimes there are miracles. But you need the door in there to get your gapping down good. You know, it's so much easier to see the gap, you know, so. Vicor tar paper to brick mold, that creates kind of like a impervious thing, you know. Sides and then the top, and there's the J channel. This is like just a J. This top J channel is an inch bigger and it folds down. You know, I cut the bottom, fold that bottom tab over. See if we can see it. So water that goes down the siding goes into this J channel and then flows, you know, around this tab into this side channel where it exits. And that gets 90% of the water. And the last little bit goes along the Vicor on the inside, you know. This isn't caulked at all. And the bottom isn't caulked at all. That's to allow water to drain out. A little bit of rain will get in here, but hardly anything. But this will make a huge difference in venting, you know, allowing things to dry out. You kind of see, let's get these are scrap pieces from the roofing. Doing the stickers on the roof. Scrap pressure treated 1x4. And some more pressure treated 1x4. This I'm going to trim off. But it's not hurting anything, so I'm just leaving it up there until I get around to it. Probably I'll leave it up there until I do the cinder block. Just because might as well. Stop selling the green roofing. This is what they applied the skew to. This Galvy. So this J-channel was made for the green roofing. And I bought the last of it. The last 5 pieces or something that they had of the J-channel I bought. I don't think they sell J-channel for the silver. So it had to be special ordered. So the siding just kind of goes over the top of this J-channel. The back side of this J-channel. It's overlapped. This one, so one thing led to another, led to some 8'6" pieces. So I got 3 8'6" pieces, and they kind of overlap 6 inches. And then up top, I got the full 12-foot piece with some scrap. I just used the scrap from there as the end of the 12-foot piece, you know? So, you know, the 12-foot piece stops right about there. That's actually where it stops, you know, right on that one and right on that one. And there's that little bit that needs more. And that was the bit that came off of that. So very little scrap. Only real scrap is from the top piece there, which is a sizable amount, but there's just no avoiding it. And I will have enough. I ordered extra apparently. I was thinking 3 and it ended up being 4 that it took. But I had extra, so I got enough to do the other side. So the stickers create air gap. Kind of the whole thing is, you'll see, you know, like humidity will form. You know, this will be dry because it's exposed to air, but there'll be moisture between this and that. You know, like back here, between this, there'll be moisture. You know, and having all these air gaps allows that moisture to dry and not become too big of an issue. But if all of this metal was just right on the tar paper, it'll stay constantly wet, you know, behind the metal. You know, there would always be the little humidity condensation droplets, except in the middle of summer. You know, in the middle of summer where it's 100-degree heat and just sun for no rain for 2 months, 3 months, you know, dry out at that point. But the rest of the year, it would just be wet behind there. So you can never have enough air gaps. Any bugs that get behind there will get killed in that hot summer heat, you know, so bugs will never be a permanent problem. Let's see. But standing water, you know, moist, near permanent moistness is a problem. So you always want air gaps. And it's kind of, it also helps keep the hot sun off of my block and my wood, so it's kind of another layer of insulation, you know, rather than applying the heat to it. Kind of allows it to vent off a little. So that's my R values in here. So that's it for siding part 2. Getting the door installed. Very nice. Oh, not too bad. You know, in the evenings, it's just been dripping wet with humidity. You know, everything gets little water droplets on it. at night. Let's see. I'm gonna do some interior stuff before I do that. I still haven't ordered the windows. That'll be part of my final order of materials. But before I do that, I wanna put these up. So I'm gonna finish doing some priming. You know, use maybe these stacks right here. What I'm kind of grabbing. That'll go bop 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 bop. And then I can move stuff around again. You know, this has been floated, and it should be set enough, cured enough to where I can be putting shelves and stuff on it. Yeah. Anyways, that's so it'll be some interior videos. You know, interior part 1, maybe interior part 2 videos. Before I do any more exterior videos. You know, siding videos. Let's see how it goes. Yeah, but that'll be it for the siding part 2. Putting in the door, putting in the siding, fascia gutter, and calling it good.
We are now only first learning about. I'm Ira Plato, and this is Science Friday. The Parker Solar Probe has flown closer to the spacecraft and has discovered behaviors in solar radiation never seen before, like the solar wind turning around and then reversing again in a matter of minutes. We'll hear from a couple of mission scientists about what they expected to find and what they didn't. Plus, it has no brain, no neurons, and it's just one big goofy cell. But somehow it can solve mazes and even learn. Coming up, we're talking about slime molds. All that and a satellite on the far side of the moon has raised its antenna to listen for the dark ages of the universe. We'll talk about it after this.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. A Saudi aviation trainee is suspected in the mass shooting at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. The attack is now under investigation as terrorism-related. Escambia County Sheriff David Morgan says within minutes, several lives were lost.
As of right now, we do have 4 deceased and approximately 8 total. That includes the ones that are deceased, by the way, that are injured.
Responding sheriff's deputies killed the suspect. This morning's was the second mass shooting at a U.S. Navy base this week. On Wednesday, a sailor shot 3 civilians at Pearl Harbor military base in Hawaii. 2 died. The sailor took his own life. Security video from inside a Border Patrol cell is contradicting the official account of the death of an ill Guatemalan teenager who died in federal custody in May. NPR's John Burnett reports the video that was released today by the news website ProPublica appears to show that federal agents did not perform welfare checks on the dying youngster as they claimed.
The disturbing black and white video shows Carlos Gregorio Hernandez collapsing on the concrete floor of a Border Patrol holding cell in South Texas. Then he's seen getting up, moving to the toilet, and collapsing again. That's where he was pronounced dead. An autopsy gave the cause as flu and pneumonia. Hernandez lay on the floor for nearly 5 hours. His cellmate discovered his motionless body and notified agents. This directly challenges Border Patrol's account that agents performed welfare checks all night long and ultimately discovered his body. The agency has been harshly criticized for its decision to put the sick boy in a barren holding cell instead of transporting him to the hospital. Border Patrol says it cannot comment because the death is under investigation. John Burnett, NPR News.
President Donald Trump has until the close of business today to inform the House Judiciary Committee if he or his lawyers plan to take part in the Democratic-driven impeachment hearings. Trump's been defending himself against accusations that he pressured a foreign government to interfere in the U.S. election process in a way that would help him politically. NPR's Windsor Johnson reports the Judiciary Committee plans to hold its next hearing on Monday.
The committee sent a letter to Trump last week giving him until today to decide whether he plans to mount a defense by calling witnesses and introducing evidence. The White House has refused to take part in the hearing so far, citing a complete lack of due process. Today's deadline comes a day after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that the president's actions give lawmakers no choice but to move forward with articles of impeachment. Trump, who has denied wrongdoing, is urging House Democrats to move quickly if they plan to impeach him so that the proceedings can move on to the Senate, where Republicans hold sway. Windsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
The Dow is up more than 1%. You're listening to NPR News.
From Kentucky Public Radio, I'm Ron Fisher. Education officials say an eastern Kentucky school district has been released from state management. WYMT-TV reports the Kentucky Board of Education voted this week to move Breathitt County Schools to state assistance. The change means that decision-making authority moves back to the local school board and superintendent. The move was recommended by Kentucky Education Commissioner Wayne Lewis, who said Breathitt County Superintendent Philip Watts was capable and ready to lead the school district. Lewis also cited findings from a comprehensive management audit and said the district had made significant improvements since it was forced under state management 8 years ago. University of Kentucky agricultural economist Will Snell says the state's farm sector has fared reasonably well this year. Snell was part of a team that delivered the annual Agricultural Economic Report Thursday during the 100th Farm Bureau meeting in Louisville.
Surprising to many is that in aggregate, we may see an increase in net farm income this year, not due to the market, but due to the availability of what we call market facilitation payments. Those were the payments that the Trump administration provided to offset the adverse effects of the trade war.
Snell says international trade uncertainty looms over Kentucky's farm economy. Kentucky producers saw increases in equine, corn, wheat, dairy, and hemp receipts. Snell says projections call for a slight increase in cash receipts in 2020, with poultry, cattle, and hogs rebounding. For Kentucky Public Radio, I'm Ron Fisher.
Support for NPR comes from the Pajamagram Company, creators of matching holiday pajamas for the whole family, including dogs and cats, with Charlie Brown's Star Wars and Grinch themes in knits, fleece, and flannel. Available at pajamagram.com.
We're Murray State's 91.3 WKMS. A 50% chance of showers today, mainly before 2 p.m. Cloudy with highs near 51. Mostly cloudy tonight, lows around 36. And partly sunny tomorrow, highs near 53. Mostly cloudy tomorrow night, lows around 41. And a 20% chance of rain Sunday afternoon, mostly cloudy, highs near 57. A 40% chance of rain Sunday night, cloudy with lows around 52.
This is Science Friday. I'm Ira Flato. Later in the hour, the first data from the Parker Solar Probe has been collected and analyzed, and it shows surprising and unexpected behaviors of the sun. We'll get into that. But first, remember we talked a few weeks ago about how scientists are working to rebuild coral reefs by planting little nubbins of coral that are more resistant to warming, or by plugging 3D printed corals into degraded habitats to give reef-dwelling fish and urchins somewhere to live while the reef recovers. But how do you actually get all that marine life to return to a recovering reef? Well, you put on the soundtrack of a healthy reef. And when the fish hear that, they start coming and swimming back. And here to talk about the theory behind that tactic is my guest, Amy Nordrum, news editor at the IEEE Spectrum. Joins us here in New York. Always welcome to have you back.
Hi, Ira.
Amy. All right, tell us about this coral reef noise idea.
Yeah, who knew reefs were so noisy? And to be clear, that sound you just heard is sort of like a highlight reel or a greatest hits version of what you might hear. All those sounds wouldn't occur at once necessarily in nature. But this was a really interesting piece of work where scientists off of the coast of Australia built 33 artificial reefs and installed underwater loudspeakers on 11 of them. And then they played recordings throughout the night that they had collected prior to bleaching that had occurred in this area. And then they measured and saw which kinds of species and how many fish returned to each of the artificial reefs.
Let's listen to that again because it was so interesting. Now, That is the best hit. The best hits.
Yeah, there's a lot of noises going on in there. There's some snapping shrimp that snap their claws at each other. There's some clownfish, which are really territorial and make noises sort of like a woodpecker at each other. Then there's a couple mystery fish mixed in that the researchers couldn't identify based on the noises. But fish who returned to the reefs with the loudspeakers more than the reefs that didn't have loudspeakers. They actually attracted twice as many fish and 50% more species.
And did they stay around?
They stuck around throughout the length of the study, which is about 40 days, and so they're hoping that will last. And this isn't, a silver bullet. You'd obviously need the restoration efforts along with it that you spoke about before. But at least in terms of getting the fish to know that the reef is available, they can hear this noise and then recognize it as a place that they might like to go.
It almost sounds like there's something unethical about tricking a fish.
I asked about that. Is this like a bait and switch effort? But the scientist I spoke with, Tim Gordon, he was telling me that, in practice you would make this a pleasant place, for the fish to live. And the sound would just be to attract them there in the beginning. And they're working on putting this out in the real world in a project in Southeast Asia
So it's all experimental right now.
Yeah, this was a proof of concept, and now they're hoping to roll it out.
I can't wait. All right, next up you have a story about an innovative new way to transplant hearts. Really interesting.
Yes, right now, hearts are recovered from donors typically after they've been declared brain dead and while the heart is still beating. But there's a new technology being tested in a clinical trial that allows doctors to recover a heart from a donor after circulatory death. So these patients are never declared brain dead but are taken off of mechanical support for other reasons. And typically you wouldn't be able to recover organs from these donors because there's a period where the heart stops beating and isn't receiving oxygen or blood flow. And instead of putting the hearts on ice to preserve them as is typical, for these cases, Duke is testing out a new technology that helps to revive and rehabilitate the heart and circulate blood through and pump oxygen in until it's ready to go into a recipient. And Duke researchers performed their first transplant using this technology just last Sunday.
So they had to make a special box to put the heart in, not an ice box, but the heart is beating in a box. It's circulating blood through it.
Exactly. It's created by this company. It's known as the Transmedics OCS system. The system is already approved for use in other parts of the world, but is currently in a clinical trial here in the U.S., and that's what the Duke researchers were participating in.
Imagine how many people's lives could be saved now with this technique.
Yeah, the doctor I spoke with said one of his colleagues did a calculation that it could expand the donor pool by 30%.
Wow, that's a lot of hearts. Your next couple of stories are about space. Let's talk about first a mission to deflect an asteroid.
Yes, this is a collaboration between NASA and the European Space Agency, and it has two parts. The first part is an independent NASA mission called DART, where they're sending a very simple spacecraft out to an asteroid called Didymos B. And it's orbiting actually around another asteroid, and NASA's spacecraft is going to ram into that asteroid and attempt to change its orbit. And then last week, the second part of this collaboration, called the HERA mission, was approved by the European Space Agency, and they'll be sending a spacecraft out a few years after the DART impact to study both asteroids in the system in more detail.
I would imagine you have to be very careful which way you nudge that asteroid.
Yes, fortunately, NASA is pretty careful about these things. The sense that I asked them, could you possibly redirect it in the wrong way? And they are specifically targeting this asteroid system. It's actually got two asteroids in it. And I didn't know this, but a lot of asteroids come in pairs or threes or fours.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's a big asteroid and a tiny asteroid orbiting around the big one, and they're targeting the tiny one. And the spacecraft they're going to slam into it isn't really big enough to knock the tiny one out of its whole orbit around the big one. It's just big enough to hopefully just change the orbit slightly. So that's why one reason they chose this specific system is because it lowers that possibility.
Another proof of concept.
Exactly.
Idea. And then there's a new Chinese experiment to listen to the cosmic dawn and the cosmic dark ages. You got me intrigued already.
Right. Well, if you look up at the moon tonight, you can't see it, but there's a satellite right now on the opposite side of the moon. Its main job is to relay messages between Earth and a lander on the moon service that was placed there by China's space agency. But it also has a secondary mission, which is to turn itself into a radio telescope that peers out into the rest of the universe and listens for signals that are so low frequency we couldn't detect them here on Earth because of interference interference in the ionosphere. And just in the last couple weeks, antennas for that experiment were deployed on the satellite and are starting to collect data.
And finally, you brought us a mystery of shrinking songbirds, not of songbird populations, but the birds themselves.
The birds themselves, yes. There's an incredible collection of songbirds, migratory birds at the Chicago Field Museum, a huge collection built up by a man named David Willard, who collected and measured by hand birds that had flown into high-rise buildings and been killed in Chicago. And this study took a look at more than 70,000 specimens from that collection from 52 different species and measured how they changed over the years that this collection was amassed, about 40 years. And they found that as temperatures became warmer, the body size of the birds actually got smaller and the wings became longer. So, we think about climate change and how animals might respond, and they might shift their range or change the timing of behaviors like reproduction. Well, now, we know with these birds, they're also already changing their morphology.
Unexpected consequences.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks.
Amy Nordrum, the news editor at the IEEE Spectrum here in New York. Now it's time to check in on the state of science.
This is KERA for WWNO, St. Louis Public Radio,
Iowa Public Radio News.
Local science stories of national significance. This time of the year, chances are good that you'll find the 1946 classic, It's a Wonderful Life. It's playing somewhere. Remember this prescient prediction?
We're listening, Sam.
Well, look, I have a big deal coming up that's going to make us all rich. George, do you remember that night in Martini's bar when you told me you'd read someplace about making plastics out of soybeans?
Yeah, as predicted, plastics became a huge business, but we never foresaw what the huge problem of getting rid of them, right? And we all thought, well, we'll just recycle them. And as we know, it's not turning out to be that easy. Joining me now to talk about what plastics are doing to waste management in Oregon is Erin Ross, a science writer and researcher at Oregon Public Broadcasting in Portland. Welcome.
Hi, Ira.
So tell us, there's a new report out on Oregon State recycling levels. How's it doing?
Not great. The data is from 2017. That's the most recent year we have numbers for, and the percent of waste that's being recycled or composted has declined. It's down to just about a quarter, about 20%, 27% of our waste is recycled, and that's a little lower than 2016 and almost 5% lower than 2014.
Oh, wow. So what's causing the drop?
It's mostly the collapse of international markets. So sorting and cleaning recycling is really expensive. So for a long time, the U.S. would just send bales of plastic to China, where it would sometimes be recycled, and it was a lot cheaper than doing it here. But near the end of 2017, China stopped accepting these products. It just wasn't financially viable for them to keep on recycling plastic, which was often contaminated and impure. So other countries started accepting it, and the U.S. just kind of started shipping it to other places. But like in the case of Malaysia, they just shipped it right back. They didn't want our contaminated plastic. So now sometimes it's burned.
And we know that plastics are a growing component of our waste, right? So there's more and more of it.
Exactly, and we're also making more waste. When we were in the recession, our waste production dropped nationally, and then we're buying more, we're making more waste.
So it's not a question of just doing a better job of sorting the things at home, bin for plastic number 1 and then for number 2, stuff like that.
No, unfortunately, and this actually kind of blew my mind when I learned it, but even like supposedly pure plastics are contaminated. So 2 number 1 soda bottles might not be recyclable together, and since plastics can only be recycled so many times before they lose their value, it's kind of always been this red herring.
Wait a minute, so I'm not number 1 bottle and a second number 1 bottle may not be the same plastic.
Yeah, they might not be the same plastic, which is really wild.
That is wild. And it's not that the people in Oregon are bad. The state bottle bill has been very successful, right?
Yeah, so Oregon had the first bottle bill in the country, which is where consumers pay a deposit on like glass or aluminum or plastic, and then they get it back when they return the empties to the state. And it's always been really successful. And in 2017, actually, the year that we have this data from, Oregon raised the deposit. And so now almost all bottle bill eligible materials are recycled. So that kind of makes this drop in total recycling levels, though, even more kind of poignant, because we're doing a lot better at recycling some things. So even with that increase, we're still losing ground overall. We're still making more waste.
So what are they suggesting that people do? Is there anything they can do other than using less stuff?
Unfortunately, there isn't really. for a long time, people who study recycling have been warning us that plastic recycling just really wasn't feasible long term. So reducing is always the best option. We can also always try to reuse. So if you get, say, like a yogurt tub, trying to repurpose that for something, using it for leftovers, it's getting at least one more life that way.
Yeah,
and of course, yeah.
I found that you can really reuse a big Ziploc bag a few times. If it's not really that dirty, they just, holding some big things in it sometimes. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aaron Ross. Thank you for taking time to be with us today. Aaron Ross, science writer and researcher at Oregon Public Broadcasting in Portland. Have a good weekend. We're going to take a break. When we come back, the strange behaviors of the sun. There is a Parker Solar Probe, it's called, and it's sending back its first data. It's the closest thing we've ever sent to the sun. And some interesting findings that were unexpected are coming back in the data. So stay with us. We'll talk with some of the mission scientists after the break. Don't go away. I'm Ira Plato. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
Hi, it's Rachel Martin. NPR is available everywhere.
Ho, ho, ho.
That's one of our listeners named Nick. You might say he is listening all the time. Nick appreciates that public radio presents the facts. We do it thanks to listeners like you who donate. Here's how to make checking our facts and checking them twice possible.
Make your special holiday gift right now when you visit WKMS.org and click the donate button. Thanks.
This is Murray State's 91.3 WKMS, radio supported by its listeners. Join in with your first gift today at WKMS.org. Support comes from Paducah's Maiden Alley Cinema, now featuring Parasite. An unemployed family ingratiate themselves into the lives of the wealthy Parks family and get entangled in a lucrative business scheme. Tomorrow at 4, there's a Movies for Me family screening of Uncle Buck. Showtimes and more online at maidenalleycinema.org.
This is Science Friday. I'm Ira Plato. Last August, NASA's Parker Solar Probe set off on a nearly 7-year mission to study the sun. And to date, it's completed 3 of its 24 scheduled orbits. And data from 2 of those orbits are already telling us things we didn't know about the star at the center of our solar system, like what influences the speed of solar wind, or the amount of dust in the sun's heliosphere, and also where scientists' models were wrong. Yeah, some interesting stuff. And here to tell us how new data from the Parker Solar Probe is shining light on the mysteries of the sun are my guests. Dr. David McComas, Principal Investigator of the Integrated Science Investigation of the Sun and Professor of Astrophysical Science at Princeton. Welcome back to Science Friday.
Thanks so much, Ira.
You're welcome. And Dr. Aleda Higginson, Parker Solar Probe Deputy Project Scientist for Science Operations at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. Dr. Higginson, welcome to Science Friday.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let me ask you first, remind us what the Parker Solar Probe was sent out there to look at. What are the questions we wanted answered? Dr. Higginson.
Yeah, so there were 3 things we most wanted to investigate. One is why the corona is so much hotter than the surface of the sun. So the corona is the atmosphere that surrounds the sun, and the surface is 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's unbelievably hot. But the atmosphere itself, the corona, is over 2 million degrees Fahrenheit, and we just don't understand why, as you move away from the sun, the source of heat, things get hotter. One of the other things we wanted to study was what accelerates the solar wind. You know, the solar wind is an ionized gas that's moving away from the sun in all directions all the time. It completely fills the solar system, and it influences everything that happens in the upper atmosphere of all of our planets. And there's a lot that we don't understand about how it forms, and so we really needed to go there and find out.
David, so it's only just gotten started, right? 3 of 24 total orbits completed, but we already have some data coming back about the solar wind. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, these first 3 orbits were the furthest ones of the 24. As the mission goes on, we'll get closer and closer to the sun.
And so let's talk about the solar wind. What has it told us so far? What kinds of mysteries has it uncovered, or questions it's answered?
So a good example is as we got in close to the sun, we didn't expect to see rotational motion of the solar wind plasma with the sun, something we call co-rotation. We expected co-rotation to break much further down, closer to the sun, maybe at 10, 15 solar radii. But all the way out at 35 to 40 solar radii, we still see much of the plasma, the solar wind plasma, sort of co-rotating with the sun and still being connected to the rotational motion of the sun. That's totally different than we expected with our models and theories.
So what does it look like compared to something we see on Earth?
So, for example, if you imagine some children on a merry-go-round, maybe spinning faster and faster as they run around the sides, they're co-rotating with the merry-go-round. If they can run fast enough, eventually they can make it go so fast they can't hang on. And at that point, they go shooting out to the sides. Excuse me. And that would be the breaking from co-rotation. So it's interesting that we're seeing all the way into 35 to 40 solar radii, still a lot of co-rotation.
And there's something really interesting about the solar wind. It's not going in a straight line coming out from the sun.
Well, there's this co-rotational part, but another interesting thing about the solar wind is we're seeing the magnetic field that's embedded in the solar wind not just being straight or fairly straight, but we're seeing things we call switchbacks, which are sort of S-shaped pieces of magnetic field, which are coming out from the sun embedded in the solar wind flow.
Mm-hmm. That's quite, and was that something predicted, Dr. Higginson, or was it something unexpected?
Well, in some sense, we were expecting to see that. There was a previous mission called Helios, which did not get nearly as close to the sun, but it did start to see these switchbacks in the solar wind. But when we couldn't figure out what they were, we kind of put them to the side. And then as we were getting ready to launch Parker Solar Probe, we started talking about it again. But we really weren't sure what we were going to see as we moved in closer. And the real surprise is just how huge these structures are when you start to get really close to the sun.
Do you have any guesses or surmising about what might be happening here?
Well, there are several theories. Every scientist right now has their pet theory. One of them is that there's this magnetic reconnection process that's happening in the corona of the sun, or maybe in the young solar wind, where magnetic fields are actually not originally in this shape, but then they reconnect together. They kind of break themselves apart and tie themselves back together in this new shape, and that somehow is moving out into the solar wind. But we really don't understand how that process is actually happening. None of our models predict that it should be there.
Our number 844-724-8255 if you'd like to talk about the sun. I find so many things about the sun amazing, like the mysteries that you mentioned. Why is the surface of the sun like 6,000 degrees, and then you move away into the corona, it's millions of degrees? Where could that energy be coming from? Any idea about what's happening with that, Dr. Higgins, Dr. McComas?
Well, I would say that we have some theories, but we don't have an answer. All the way back to the namesake of the mission, Eugene Parker, he's talked about things called nanoflares, and one of his ideas was the heating of the corona and ultimately providing energy to accelerate the solar wind might come from little tiny magnetic reconnections, like were just being described, feeding energy into the system. And so that's a model. There are other ideas about solar wind turbulence feeding in energy and other things. But without going in very close to the sun, it's impossible to have the data to be able to separate between these different ideas.
We talk a lot about how there's so much dark matter in the universe and in our solar system. Could be, and I'm just guessing here, thinking out loud, could there be something to do with the dark matter here that we don't see interconnecting somehow? Anybody thought about that? Nobody wants to take. No one wants to go out on the limb.
Probably not.
Dark matter's not something heliophysics really think about.
That's okay. I've been more stupid than this lots of times. I understand that the solar probe is using Venus, to Dr. Higginson, to get closer and closer to the sun. How does that work?
Yeah, that's right. So Parker Solar Probe is going to do 7 Venus flybys. So we've already done one. That was the first one we did before the first encounter. And we're going to do the second actually on December 26th, just in like 20 days. And this is when Parker Solar Probe's orbit encounters the orbit of Venus, and Venus happens to actually be there. And so it enters into kind of this sphere of influence around Venus, and Venus's gravity pulls on the spacecraft in such a way that it slows it down. So the speed that the spacecraft has relative to the sun as it's moving around in its orbit, it actually slows down, and this causes Parker Solar Probe to actually fall in a little bit closer to the sun. So we're going to do this 7 times, and that means that we have 7 kind of incremental steps closer and closer to the sun for each of the closest approaches that we have.
Interesting. David, what about the small energetic particles events? What are they, and why is that significant?
Yeah, so this is another really fascinating piece of the story. Out at Earth's orbit, we see large energetic particle events. They're actually very important because they can affect satellite performance. They can affect the ability of astronauts to be out in deep space and things like that. They're a type of radiation. But we don't see really tiny events. And what we've learned as we've gotten closer and closer to the sun with Parker Solar Probe is that there's sort of a spectrum of smaller and smaller events. And that's really important because it may be providing the seed particles that ultimately get accelerated up in these larger, much more dangerous events.
Interesting. 844-724-8255 is our number. Let's go to San Francisco. Morali, welcome to Science Friday. Let's see if we can get... Did we lose Morali? No, we're not quite there yet. Let me continue. So how close is the solar probe to the sun right now, David? How much closer is it going to get?
So the first 3 orbits had perihelia, or closest point in the orbit, of about 36 solar radii. By the time we get into the last 3 orbits, we'll be inside of 10 solar radii. And so if you've seen an eclipse, for example, you see the moon in front of the sun, imagine the width of that moon 4.5 times out to the side. That's where we'd be. So we'd basically be in the corona itself, flying through the corona itself that you can see in eclipses.
That's good that you bring that up, because I now have Morali from San Francisco on the phone. Hi, welcome. Why don't you ask your question, please?
Sure. My question is, how do they measure the 2 million temperature in the corona? Because I would assume that any probe would melt if it got that close to the sun.
How do you measure 2 million degrees without melting? David, later?
Sure. I'll take this. So,
okay.
There's a very specialized heat shield on the front of the solar probe, and so it absorbs heat that then we dump out the sides, basically. So most of the instrumentation is actually behind the heat shield in a shadow behind the spacecraft. One of the instruments sticks out and actually is made out of ceramics and able to measure this. But the key is that the temperature is high, but the density of the material is low. So the total amount of energy deposited by that high temperature is still small enough that we can manage it through proper thermal control in the spacecraft.
So it's like you're saying the energy hitting is very hot, but its density is so small it doesn't really impact it very much.
That's correct.
Later, while getting any data back from the probe is exciting, are you more excited for a specific orbit? Are you waiting for some orbit that's going to, be the bingo orbit for you?
Well, I mean, we don't know what we're going to find as we move closer and closer to the sun. One of the things that, as a heliophysicist that studies the solar wind, we're really excited to detect is something called the Alfvén point, which is where the solar wind starts moving faster than a wave in a magnetic field can move. And so this is really the point at which the physics transitions from kind of solar wind physics to, kind of coronal physics. And traditionally, we thought that this point was pretty low down to the sun, but there's been some evidence recently that maybe on just this next closest orbit, or maybe the one after, we might actually get there and be able to cross this Alfvén point. And I mean, that's gonna make history for heliophysics if we can do that.
In what way?
Well, I mean, it's a regime that we've never been able to take measurements in before, and I have a feeling that there are going to be a lot of sad plasma physicists whose theories break once we get that data back.
You're hoping about that? So what happens as you get closer to the sun? How does the atmosphere that the probe is traveling in? You started to say that these things are going to change. In what way will they change?
So the magnetic field gets stronger for one, and that really influences the way that energy is transported through the plasma itself. And then the density goes up as well, which is something that also really matters for that. So, we have experiments here on Earth that are able to tell us something about what the physics looks like there, but really to actually understand it, we need to go to the best lab ever, and that's the sun's corona.
And what will be the ultimate fate of the probe? David?
Well, the orbit that we end up in after we have our seventh flyby of Venus is actually a long-term stable orbit, so we'll stay in that orbit a very, very long time. There are still expendables left on the spacecraft, extra rocket fuel and things that we need. So it's quite possible that the mission will last long beyond 2025, and we'll continue to get great science out of it. Eventually something will fail on the spacecraft. It always does, but most NASA spacecraft last far longer than they were originally designed for. So we're really hopeful for a very, very long time of observing the sun with Parker.
That's great. I'm Ira Plato. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios. Talking with Dr. David McComas and Dr. Aleda Higginson about the Parker Space Probe. Let's see, we have a few more people. I want to talk about, here's an interesting question from Wynn in Menlo Park, California. Hi, Wynn.
Hi, thank you very much. My question is, we know an awful lot about how the planets are affected by the sun, but what is there in the universe that affects the sun the most?
Any answer to that, David or Aleda? What is there out there? I guess when you look into our solar system, you see the sun and then you see Jupiter, right? It's the biggest thing, two things there. What out there affects us?
The answer I would give is the heliosphere as a whole is affected by the material outside. It's the interaction of this expanding million-mile-an-hour solar wind that's flowing out from the sun all directions in space all the time, and the inflowing material from the local interstellar medium. And the interaction between those two forms the heliosphere, the region of influence of our sun. And so as the sun has gone around the galaxy a couple of times, it bobs up and down across the equator, and the interaction between the local interstellar medium and the sun has varied a lot over time. It's not exactly how the outside affects the sun per se, but it is how the outside affects the heliosphere.
Aleda, why is it so hard to understand what's going on inside the sun that causes the corona, the temperature problems we don't understand? It's a nuclear, basically, fusion experiment going on in there, right? Not an experiment, but it's a reaction. Do we not understand enough about that?
Yeah, well, it's hard to understand what's going on under the surface of the sun. That's definitely true. One of the problems that Parker won't be able to answer, but that heliophysicists have in general is to understand the solar dynamo, and this is the process that actually generates the magnetic field of the sun, which then Parker can study once it gets into the corona. And this is what causes these activity cycles that the sun has, where it goes from what we call solar min to solar max. And these are minimum periods of activity and then maximum periods of activity where you have these really large energetic particle events or coronal mass ejections. It's hard to understand what's going on inside the sun, but we would love to figure that out.
Well, we're running out of time, but I think the most fascinating thing I've heard about the sun is that the light generated within the middle of it, where it's very, very hot, the photons can take 100,000 or 1,000,000 years to get to the surface to escape. Is that right? It's amazing.
Yep, that's right.
Then just a few minutes to get here. That's amazing. Okay, we've run out of time. We'll check back with you when the next round of data comes in. Okay.
That sounds great.
Sounds
Ira.
great.
Thanks so
Can't
much.
wait.
You're welcome. Dr. David McComas, Principal Investigator of the Integrated Science Investigation of the Sun, Professor of Astrophysical Sciences at Princeton University, and Dr. Aleda Higginson, Parker Solar Probe Deputy Project Scientist for Science Operations at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a creature that has no brain, no neurons, but can solve mazes, and it can even learn. And you can have one of them for your own. If you'd like, we'll tell you how. Stay with us. Ira Plato. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios. This is Science Friday. I'm Ira Plato. And now it's time for our very first charismatic creature corner. Sorry. It's going to be a fun segment. Some of our favorite stories about creatures, bees, bats, birds, even the bacteria in your gut. Well, and starting this week, we'll be featuring one charismatic creature a month. And by creature, we mean anything. Animals, viruses, carnivorous plants, you name it. And by charismatic, we really mean intriguing, charming, worthy of your curiosity. But we'll let you decide if a creature makes the cut. Making the case for today's creature is our charismatic creature correspondent, Science Friday's own Ella Fetter. Hi.
Hey, Ira. Sorry about all that alliteration. So we asked our listeners on the Science Friday Vox Pop app for suggestions for creatures, and they had a lot.
Yes, please talk a lot more about the tardigrades.
I'd like to learn more about tardigrades.
Pangolins.
Narwhals. Tardigrades.
Now I would like to know more about the emperor penguin.
Four-legged snake.
The wolverine.
Dumbo octopus.
Also, I think known as the water bears.
Musk turtles.
Brown Japanese marmorated stink bug.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So first, thank you to everybody who submitted suggestions. You can still submit them on the Science Friday Vox Pop app at the end of this segment. So a lot of people were hoping for narwhals or penguins or tardigrades were really popular, and I totally get that.
Yeah.
I really like them too. But these creatures would not be particularly challenging for our very first charismatic creature corner because they are undeniably oozing with charm.
I get it.
And speaking of oozing, that's my segue, that's for you. We did get this message from Ronnie in Coudersport, Pennsylvania.
I am curious about slime molds. I have heard that they solve mazes, and I'd like to know more about creatures who do problem solving without having a brain.
So, today I am here to convince you that slime molds are charismatic creatures. I'm going to have some help from two researchers. I'm going to talk to you about one slime mold in particular.
Okay, but first you have to tell me what exactly is a slime mold.
What is this? Okay, I'm going to start by telling you what is not a slime mold, or what a slime mold is not. It's not a mold, actually. It's a misnomer. It's not a plant, or an animal, or a bacterium, or any kind of fungus. It is a protist, which actually does not mean a lot. The kingdom Protista is kind of a junkyard for the natural world. It's where we stick all of those creatures that are really hard to classify. So slime molds are kind of a blobby thing. You can find them in leaf litter, growing under logs, inside rotting wood. There are a lot of different species with delightful names like dog vomit and wolf's milk. But today, we're going to talk about one species called Physarum polycephalum, which is the many-headed slime mold. So to learn more about them, I actually called up a researcher in Sydney earlier this week, Tanya Laddie. She studies collective intelligence. And just to paint a picture for our listeners, here's Tanya explaining what these look like.
So they're yellow. They're really mucusy and sticky. And I mean, if you touch them, they just kind of goop up your hands, really. I mean, it's not something you really want to be touching at all. They move so slowly you can't quite see them moving. They have what I think is a lovely floral smell, but everyone else tells me is gross. So, yeah, they basically just look like mucus. That's really what a slime mold looks like patterned mucus.
So it doesn't sound great. They can actually be really, really beautiful. We have some pictures up at sciencefriday.com/slime mold.
So they look like patterned mucus. So far, so good. I hear they're getting trendy as pets in France. Is that right? What do you need to know to have them as a pet?
Yeah, that's what I heard from a researcher in France, that they're the new Tamagotchi pet. Okay, so if you're going to have a pet, which I do, slime molds like darkness, moisture. They also really like rolled oats, apparently. They really go wild for these. No one knows why. I hear the American strain really likes the Quaker brand for some reason. So if you give them a rolled oat, they will slime over to it, engulf it, and pulse, which is apparently something they do when they really like their food.
And what don't they like? What do you have to avoid with that?
You want to avoid light and dryness. So they like it dark and moist. So like our listener Ronnie mentioned, these goopy, mucusy things, they can do really incredible things like solve mazes. But here's the truly astounding part. These creatures, organisms, if you want to call them, they are just one cell. They are one cell with a lot of nuclei. All the yellow goo, even when you see them and they're like, half a meter across in size, all of that goo is one single cell. It's a unicellular organism. And it can get to those sizes because it has these millions of nuclei that just keep dividing inside of the same membrane. So you wind up with this enormous creature, but because they're all sharing a single sort of envelope, it's still technically one cell. So, as you know, most cells are actually invisible to the naked eye. You need a microscope to see them. The ones in Tanya's lab get up to about 12 inches in diameter. And there was one slime mold species that allegedly, this needs to be independently verified, but allegedly it could cover 10 square feet and weigh as much as 44 pounds.
Get out.
Allegedly.
44 pounds square feet. That's pretty cool.
I mean, it's a one cell. That's astounding. So this is where I think it gets truly interesting. Slime molds, for one giant goopy cell, are way smarter than they have any business being. And it took people a long time to notice. They were used as model organisms in labs for decades, but really just to study cell mechanics. They're really handy because, one, they're, as we mentioned, visible. You can also cut them up into little pieces, and then each of those little pieces becomes its own independent slime mold. And people weren't really thinking about things like, what can a slime mold do? How do they behave? Until a Japanese researcher in 2000 changed all that. So to tell us more, we have Simon Garnier. He's an associate professor at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, and he works on swarm intelligence. Simon, welcome to the show.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Hey there. Well,
pretty good, thank you.
So just okay. To start us off, what did this Japanese researcher Toshiyuki Nakagaki? What did he do in 2000 that got people so excited?
Well, he published a paper in Nature, I believe, that showed that slime mold was capable of solving a maze, right? So, I don't know, in newspapers, sometimes you have these little games where you have to go from one end of a maze to another end, finding the shortest possible path. And that's a complicated task to do, even for an human adult. But the slime mold was capable of doing that task in what seems like a very short amount of time for slime mold.
Now, I heard about them recreating the Tokyo Railway Network. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So imagine you're the mayor of New York and you're trying to redesign the subway of New York City, which, is necessary, I think. You are going to face a big challenge. The challenge is you're going to have to build a network that's both usable and robust to any form of disturbances. So imagine like when the L train stops working, you need to be able to route the users through different routes. But at the same time, you want it to be cheap. So you don't want to build too many lines, but you want enough connection between the lines so that people can go around. So that's a problem that is very complicated to solve. But Nakagaki in 2010 published this paper where he showed that slime mold is capable of finding the sweet spot, the right balance between building a network that is very robust, very capable, but at the same time is relatively cheap to build. And that was this paper was done by comparing the property of the network built by slime mold to the property of the actual subway network in Tokyo.
So I find this really impressive, although I find their ability to learn even more impressive. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so the ability of optimizing things is something that is common to a lot of organisms. But the ability to learn is not necessarily present in, at least that we know of, in all organisms on the planet. And so for a long time, it wasn't clear whether slime mold was capable of learning and was capable of encoding information and use that information for later use. And quite recently, actually, there's been a number of studies that have showed that it's capable of, for instance, anticipating events, which means that you have to learn when an event is likely to come. But there's also other studies that show that slime mold is capable of learning that a bad stimulus is actually has no consequence. So it's a phenomenon that we call habituation. I don't know if I should explain what habituation is here.
Please do.
Yeah, habituation is simple things, right? Like if you're at a cocktail party and then there's some annoying voice in the background or someone singing bad music, the beginning is going to be extremely annoying to you, but as this sort of stimulus keeps being repeated, at some point you are going to habituate. Your reaction to that stimulus is going to decrease over time, allowing you to still function properly in an environment even though there is annoying stimuli around. And so that experiment that was done by, I'm guessing that's the French researcher you talked to, Audrey Dussutour, showed that slime mold doesn't like salty environments. If it has to cross a salty environment to find food, will over time learn that it's okay to cross these dangerous salty places in order to get access to food. So it will habituate to this negative stimulus in order to get access to resource.
Well, you're sort of winning me over. Anything else you can tell me about the great?
We're making the case here. What if we want to convince Ira that slime molds are charismatic? Is there anything else that he should know or think about?
Well, I think for me, what's absolutely fascinating with that organism is, as Tanya described it, it has the consistence of snot essentially. It is bright yellow, which is not a very serious color. It doesn't smell very good. It tastes even worse. It tastes like old salad.
Wait, pause.
You've tasted them?
Oh yeah, of course you have to. If you're a biologist, you have to taste what you're working on at some point. Well, as long as it's not going to kill you, you should probably try at least once. But yeah, so this organism has nothing impressive. When you look at it, when you see it for the first time, it doesn't seem to be moving or doing anything impressive. But then if you start posing problem to that organism, you see that it's capable of solving these problems in ways that are very close to the way our best algorithms are capable of solving these same problems. So for me, that's the impressive part of it, is that it's probably the least sexy organism to look at, and at the same time, it's extremely, extremely smart, given the fact that, again, it's just a sack of lipid and proteins that is blabbing around in the environment.
There you go. I'm Ira Flato. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios, talking about slime mold with Ella Fetter.
So I had a question for you. I think it was earlier this week, our video producer, Luke Groskin, gave me a little slime mold, dehydrated, to keep as my own pet. It's now the office pet. And I brought it into the studio today.
There it is, a yellow little streak, and you fed it an oatmeal?
So I started by adding a little bit of water. I didn't add enough because it dried back up. But today, added more. It got really slimy. Can you see this?
Absolutely. It's grown in size since earlier in the day.
It's all veiny and slime moldy. And so we're wondering if you had any tips for successfully raising our new unnamed. And we'll take suggestions from listeners for the name as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's an organism that's actually fairly easy to grow. It likes humidity, right? If it's not humid enough, it's going to dry out. But actually, the good thing is, even when it's dry, you can resuscitate it. It's a complicated word for me. You can make it back, come to life with just a little bit of water.
So where do you get one? Where do you get one from?
Oh, you can get one in any of the woods around New York City or New Jersey. You can also order it online. There's a number of companies that will ship you a kit of slime mold for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 bucks.
There you go.
So it's very, very easy to get access to. And once you have it, if you find the right condition, you can grow it indefinitely, essentially.
I cannot
So
wait.
a little bit of humidity. It likes warmer climate, so, somewhere around 78, 80 degrees, it's a good temperature for it.
So,
and then a lot of oatmeal.
I've given it a single flake so far. So we're just about out of time. We've only scratched the surface for slime molds. There's a lot more, and if you want to go to sciencefriday.com/slime mold, you'll learn more. I think that's about it. I hope I've convinced you, Ira.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing all your guests on the show.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Simon, for coming on. Simon Garnier
Thanks
is
for having me.
Associate Professor at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, and also a special thanks to Tanya Laddie from the University of Sydney.
Thank you both for joining us today. And we want to ask our listeners, what do you think are
Wintertime. Not the time for slime molds. But actually probably feels warm today. I'm guessing probably close to 60, if not 60. So it's not without reason that there might be a slime mold hiding under the bark somewhere. Never know. But brought a bag full of good times. I don't know if it's gonna show. It's oatmeal. Oh, there it goes, finally. So the trap for him. No. I was hoping to find one. Slime mold. Put some oatmeal around it and then just leave the camera and see it slowly move towards the oatmeal and eat it. I'm not finding any. Suppose I'll have to do some videos of it when I do find one, but that'll probably be whenever. You never know when. This tree used to be standing, dead standing. You can kind of see how recent that is. The root groove, kind of just dead standing, leaning against that tree up there. I don't know, a few months ago it fell over finally. It's got all that. So slime molds are cool, but they're not as cool as that thing made them out to be. So they kind of just do up a grid network, little hubs, and those hubs are connected by little links. And it's all about efficiency. And the links and chains, you know, and hubs that aren't really needed, that take longer to do the same thing, just get removed. So it starts off building a bunch, and then it just kind of whittles away the unneeded ones, leaving the more efficient ones. And that's pretty much what everything does. The roots on the tree, branches on the tree. You know, it's kind of like these pine trees don't have any branches down below, but all their branches are up top because the ones down below weren't getting any sun. Kind of like the hubs and links on the thing. I should have gotten away with. It's also kind of the same thing as this. It kind of look like roots. I think it's armadillo. You never know. Kind of looks like roots. But it's mycelium. This is a hardwood mycelium. Kind of see right there. I don't know if it's gonna go just on this. Thing. It just looks like a glaring white thing. I don't know if it's picking up the colors good. Let's see. Those are some baby mushrooms getting ready to sprout. Sprout off of that mycelium. Little baby getting ready to sprout. And these right here look like some kind of a conch. Really no use for a conch. They're really woody. Painter's conchs used to be used for, I don't know, I guess painting. Like maybe you get a dye, you can grind them up into a paint. Some of them make a half decent tea, but not, you know, nothing to really go out of your way. You know, if you're just tired of drinking plain water, you know, maybe put a conch in there. They take oil good. Making an oil lamp. Oil and lard. Some more mushrooms. Yeah, mushrooms are by far the more common. I don't know what that is. That might be poison ivy, actually. I don't want to touch that vine. Not actually a trap, you know, oatmeal trap, but had it on me. I may end up cutting this up. A couple of these nice big downed ones. Hard to say if anything's living in it, but it doesn't look disturbed. I do got that. Wow, look at that. It's like a rat. Oh, that's squirrel poop. The squirrel might be living in it. Those are squirrel turds. Used to be living in it. Maybe not now, but you never know. No look on the slime mods. Maybe it's